What's up, guys? It's Kyle with Dirt Bike Channel here. This is the Dirt Bike Channel podcast, and we have a freaking awesome guest today. That's right. I am going to bring on Tim Pilg. He is president of Beta USA. That's right. We have got a president of Beta USA. We've got the president of Beta USA coming on today to talk to us about all things Beta dirt bikes. I'm super excited about this, and I'm so thankful that Tim was able to take the time out today and give us a little bit of insight into the Beta process and how everything goes. I'll get into this with Tim here in just a minute as well. But I've had 4 Betas now. I have only ridden 3 of them. I've got a Beta 300, a 2020 Beta 300 RR Race Edition that I haven't ridden yet. But the other Betas that I've ridden, I'll go over that in just a second here. But I'm super excited to talk to Tim. So I'm just going to try to get him on the line right now with the phone number that he gave me.
Hello, it's Tim. Can I help you?
Hey, Tim. Kyle Brotherson here. How are you?
I'm good, Kyle. How are you?
I'm good. Is this still an okay time to chat?
Yes, sir.
So just a little bit of background, Tim. We haven't met before. We've talked over the last several years, though. Tim Pilg, you're the president of Beta USA. I've got that right, don't I?
Yes, sir. Tim Pilg.
Oh, Tim Pilg.
Should have an E on the end. No, that's okay.
Sorry, it's the first.
I've been called worse, Kyle.
Oh, dang it, Tim Pilg. Sorry about that. It's the first time we've talked, so I hadn't had anyone give me the pronunciation for your name there. So
yeah, it should have a J like Pilg. You know, it's what it's supposed to have. But yeah, like I said, I've been called worse. No worries.
Very good, very good. Well, the listeners out there, just to kind of give a recap of the bikes that I've had, because this has been my association with your company. I've had a 2017. Well, you guys were awesome. You lent me a 2017 Beta 300 RR. That bike was awesome. And then earlier this year I guess the year we're in 2019, it was a 2019 Beta 390 RR Race Edition. I have gone down saying that was my favorite 4-stroke bike of all time so far. I loved that bike. Loved the forks. The motor just did something for me. The whole bike was just so confidence inspiring. And then we follow that up with this 2020 Beta 200 RR, and that thing has surprised me. It's so well balanced. The motor just has this kind of playful nature to it, yet a torquey nature to it, and I've been ecstatic. And then just this last week, 1 week ago, I finally wrote a check for my first Beta. So the first 3 Betas that I tested or have been testing were loaners from you, essentially. And then this week, I went ahead and I picked up and bought the 2020 Beta 300 RR Race Edition. Haven't ridden it yet, but I can tell you the styling is on point. So the guys over there working hard behind the scenes are doing a really bang-up job on that stuff. So I just wanted to thank you for giving me the opportunity on those other bikes, and you guys are doing a fantastic job on these things.
Oh, thank you. And likewise, thank you for taking the time and testing our bikes. And, we call it Beta Love. You're giving us Beta Love. Whether it's good or bad, it doesn't really matter as long as we get some love. Our engineers are quite special. And, it's just the 390 you're discovering what many have. It's just the bikes are quite special.
Yeah, and there's just something different about them. And, because I've owned a number of 350s in the past, and I've ridden a lot of different bikes. And the fun thing about that 390 is it did things a little differently. It had a little bit different personality, and it didn't feel like it was trying to tear your head off. And it didn't feel like it was so high-strung, and yet it would just go fast. I mean, it wasn't like the fastest bike in a drag race that I've ever seen, but I never showed that to anyone because it doesn't matter. We're not drag racing these bikes. What we need them to do in the off-road world and in the trail world is to give us confidence and be able to, handle obstacles and handle bumps and handle, different things that come up in the trail and not upset the chassis, not upset the bike, and not upset the rider, and give you the confidence that you need to carry the lines that come naturally to you. And that was the thing that was just so fun about that bike is you forget that you're on a bike and you're just gelling with it. And that was the best thing about that one. So yeah, I wanted to get obviously though your story here. So I've got a number of questions here that we'll kind of run through. But I wondered if you could kind of tell the listeners your dirt bike genesis story, how you got started in dirt bikes, how old were you, what sort of bikes were you on? I think we'd be really interested in hearing about that.
Oh, sure. Great. Thanks for asking. So basically, I raced BMX as a kid, and then I had got introduced to motorcycling at a young age through some friends of mine, some twins. I grew up the Maroney brothers. Their dad bought them a little XR75, and I rode that thing and was hooked. I remember they had to share it, so between three of us, we had to share this little XR75, which was kind of hilarious. So my dad had passed away when I was young. I was only 9 years old, and I was one of those ADHD kids, you know. And my mom didn't put me on any medicine, so I was just wide open all the time. So she said, you know, she's trying to figure something out to do with me. So she bought me a dirt bike and helped me. I had jobs when I was younger and helped me buy my first bike was a Hodaka Super Combat 125.
Cool.
And ultimately, that today I attribute to being a motorcycle mechanic because she basically said, you know, you're going to have to keep the thing running. So I would just I'd ride all the time that bike, and that was back in that was in the 70s. I'm 53, so it's that's what got me started. And then I worked at a grocery store when I was 14 or 15, and I always hung out at our local Mako shop. And the owner there asked me if I wanted to work there. I couldn't believe it. I was like, "You want to pay me to work at a motorcycle shop? I mean, really?"
Yeah.
So that was when I was 15. I started working at a place called Phil's Mako, and then I immediately started riding Makos. I got involved with motocross when I was 16 and started racing motocross, and did that for a number of years while working at the shop. And then I got into trials later on. I got hooked on trials. I tried a trials bike, and then I rode a trials event. Boy, that was it. I just got hooked on trials for a number of years. So I rode some nationals and still competed in motocross at the same time, and then rode a little bit of off-road, quite a bit of off-road back at that time as well. And had a dealership of my own starting in 1989. I started a dealership. It was a Polaris dealership. And then I picked up Yamaha and then Suzuki, KTM. And so I had and Polaris, Yamaha, Suzuki, and KTM. But I rode a Beta back in the day when I rode trials. That's how I was familiar with Beta. And then after about 20 years in the retail business, I was kind of poking around searching for, I wanted to get into distribution. So ultimately, I dabbled with a few different companies, not really getting too involved. But then I got sent a fax over to Beta, just asking them. I knew they started building enduro bikes. This was late 2005, early 2006. They got back into the enduro business. And ironically, they had a person here doing some consulting for them. And they said, "Hey, we have somebody there. He's going to come pay you a visit." So that's kind of how that worked out. The timing was perfect. I was ready to kind of get out of the retail business and get involved with a distributor. So I started the company, which was American Beta, back in 2006, and just started basically worked on the bikes a couple of years to get them here. And ultimately grew that into Beta USA, which is now owned by my Italian counterparts. But ultimately, that's about it in a nutshell. I live, eat, sleep motorcycles. I have my whole entire life.
That is so cool. And that's one of the things I love about talking to people in this industry is, excuse me, for the most part, people that are deep in the industry like you are have had a passion for motorcycles from an early age, and they couldn't really shake it. And it sounds like that, that started with you. It started on BMX and then started running the 125s at a young age, and then, working at a Mako shop, racing motocross, getting hooked on trials and off-road riding, and then you had your hand in a dealership, and that's amazing. I think, and to me, that means something. It means something that the companies that are producing bikes or trying to sell the bikes or distribute the bikes, it means that they care. They get it because they're into this sport just as much as the rest of us and trying to push it forward. So that's fun to hear. So thanks for sharing that.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, we've our customers. I deal with I handle all the incoming emails in our business still to this day because I want to know what our customers are. I want to hear their stories, what problems they're having, what fun they're having, everything. It's really important. But yeah, it's a great. I encourage the younger generation to get involved with it because you'll get good at it. You can make a good living at it. You'll get good in the motorcycle business. There's not a ton of people out there diving into it, but boy, it's been extremely rewarding. And all my good friends that I'm close to that have been in the industry, it's the same story. They're just dedicated to the business. They love it. It's a job, but it's not really a job. It's hard work. It's challenging. Um, I like the competitive nature of it for sure. I mean, we're Beta. I think as people ask me all the time, "Who's your competition?" KTM. I say, "No, we are." I think basically we're our own competition. We just have to do our job well and make sure we do things right. The industry itself is already there. We just have to take care of the customers. And we have phenomenal engineering team, and so it's a great marriage there for everybody.
Yeah, no, can we get a little bit more background? Because you mentioned you had a couple of tidbits in there. You said that you kind of started American Beta in 2006, and that has evolved into Beta USA now that is owned by maybe corporate Beta in Italy. Can you give us a brief history of Beta motorcycles, kind of at a high 40,000 foot view? I mean, because I get a lot of questions, people asking me, is that just a trials bike company? When did they start producing the modern off-road dirt bike? And I know you mentioned that briefly, but just give us the 40,000 foot overview of Beta motorcycles from your standpoint.
For sure, it's a phenomenal story. Actually, started in the early 1900s, 1904, 1905. Two gentlemen, Enzo Bianchi, Origo Tosi. That's where the name Beta comes from. Those two gentlemen. Enzo Bianchi is the grandfather of the owner of Beta today, Lapo Bianchi, who is my boss, and he's about roughly my age. So ultimately, Beta started building bicycles back then, and until the 50s, and then they got into motorcycle production, and they continued motorcycle production. Lapo's father, Giuseppe, took the company over from Enzo, and then took it to. They got into motocross. They built the full motocross range. They built enduros. This was back in the 70s when motocross took off. And then what happened in the early 80s is late 70s to early 80s. A lot of the Japanese bikes, of course, were steamrolling over the European brands.
Yeah.
Bultaco, Osa, all the big European brands, including Mako, and Beta chose to dabble into trials in the mid '80s there, and that really helped the company survive. So they focused on trials. They got out of motocross and enduro at that time, which was hindsight was the best thing they could have ever done. Because they probably wouldn't be around today. It'd be tougher to be around if they would have fought the Japanese in that period, just because of certain labor. There were labor issues back then with the European Union and just different things that the company struggled with. So then Beta continued to push on, and then in 2005, Lapo made the decision back actually earlier than that to develop an enduro bike again and get involved with the enduro business. But Beta is I've dealt with many motorcycle corporations, and we're not a corporation. Beta is a true family-run business. It's the same family since 1904. It's the grandson of the original founder, who is as passionate, if not more passionate, than the original founder. He's a phenomenal guy to work for. Extremely honest in the way he does business. We pass that on through to the U.S. business, but working around the clock. And he works very hard with his engineering team to provide a product that we don't worry about market share. We don't worry about rushing a product to the market. We don't have to because we don't have any investors. So it's a good business plan for us. We have all the technology that the other manufacturers have. We build all our own engines in-house, including the raw machining of the engines, the cylinder heads, everything. We do all that in-house. And ultimately, it's a company that has survived through many ups and downs. they're still based out of Florence, Italy. Our factory's located just about 20 miles out of Florence. Um, and yeah, we just a phenomenal company. We've they've really flourished at different times. The trials business is still good for us because the bikes are super dependable. We're kind of what I tell people. We're kind of the Honda of the trials business. It's just the mainstream trials bike for sure.
That's so cool. Now, I'd heard kind of some of the things about this being a family company and them having a great interest in the product that is delivered to the consumers. So one question that I was thinking about while I was going over some of the things we could talk about is how does and you've got a really unique position to talk about this because you've had so much interactions with these other motorcycle companies, and you just mentioned that Beta isn't a corporation like these others; it's a family-run business. So can you talk a little bit about how Beta being a family-run company, how does that affect the end product? Versus just like a corporation that has to prove something to the investors and prove something to the rest of the world. With this being a family run company and them being vested in that process, how does that change things for you?
Well, I think overall for Beta as a company, it allows us to be a little bit more free in our design, and also because we don't have as many mouths to feed, so to speak, as far as investors, and we don't have to show anything on paper as far as growth. I've always said business is like a balloon. You sometimes you air it up, and sometimes you gotta let air out. Or what happens if you continue to grow year after year after year, the balloon will pop.
Yeah.
And I think the other companies, which I think they all do a good job. I'm one of those guys. Hey, look, all these motorcycles are good. Let's face it, they're all good. With today's technology and engineering, they're all pretty darn good products. But from Beta standpoint, in fact, my friends will ask me, why would I buy a Beta? I say, well, they're good bikes, but more importantly, they're just a really, really good company. The company itself, it's got deep roots, and the way they do business overall is more simple. We can do things more simple. We don't have as much red tape to cut through with our dealers. We have a very simple dealer approach. Uh, our dealers, we have no flooring, for example, for our dealers. Our dealers all pay cash for their bikes. So basically, everything is paid for, and ultimately, that way we know where we stand all the time. We always, as a company, we know where we stand. We don't have um, financing and huge debt and interest payments and all that stuff. So ultimately, the company can run a little bit leaner, and we just have to, build the right products and make sure everybody's happy. That's why I say we're our own competition. But as far as the corporation side, I think it's let's face it, it revolves around growth all the time. So I think that's probably, obviously we like to grow a little bit at a time, but we want to be careful. We run out of models certain times of the year, and where the big corporations will just spit out more. You know, so there's pros and cons, but ultimately for us, I think in a nutshell, we're able to do things a little more freely. You know, not as much paperwork to plow through to get a project done.
Yeah. So tell me, does the the ownership, the family ownership, do they actually ride bikes and help in the testing of these things and give input in that as well?
Oh, absolutely. It's Mr. Bianchi. I mean, he works every day with hands on with his engineers, and he is very keen on um, how the bike feels, so that he puts the final approval on every bike. And our engineers work very hard. The number one goal of this company is exactly what you found out when you rode the bike. You said it feels different. It feels like you're not even really riding. The goal is to produce a product that gives you an experience when you get off the bike like no other bike. And I think that they've achieved that in many ways. And that's through it's what we call beta magic. Like I was saying, it's beta magic, and it's we have some guys that know a lot of things about balance and trials in the trials development world, and we transfer that over to our bikes. And because a trials bike, you can enlarge in the crank have 3 millimeters, and it makes a huge difference in the way the bike feels. So there's many different things that our engineers will do, and they work directly with the owner, with Mr. Bianchi, and to create these products. We have a test track right outside our factory, and when you're there, when I'm there for business meetings, all day long, Kyle, there's bikes ripping around out there, and they come in and they fiddle and they go back out and they come back in, and all day long. So they are just basically working on improvements and enhancements to give the rider a feeling. So when they ride the bike, that's where the term rideability came from. That basically came from our owners and the press telling us the same thing. Hey, I rode this thing, and it's just easier to ride than my other bike. So that's kind of the tagline that we picked up, and we're kind of run with it on our advertising because it's true.
Yeah, no, I've definitely found that to be the case. That kind of brings me, it kind of pops something else into my mind. You talking about riders going around right outside the factory and doing R&D. So with the company being Italian, is most of the R&D, the research and development, happening there in Italy, or is some of that also happening in the United States? How does that play out?
All of it happens in Italy.
Okay.
So basically, everything is done in house. Now Beta USA, we have made changes on the motorcycles. For example, the cross trainer has a lot to do with the U.S. with our input from day one. Creating originally was going to be a trials bike engine and an enduro chassis. We thought, I'd push the factory to get that going back in 2006, and then back in 2007, I actually rode a pre-production bike they built with a 4-stroke Evo trials bike in it. An enduro chassis, and the thing was just zero fun whatsoever. It just was not fun. Had no fun factor. So basically, then when they started developing the 2-stroke engine, then they kind of tied that in, and we named it a cross trainer, and it's been just a great success story. But we have, mainly me coming from a mechanical background, we have a lot of input on updates and changes to make things better in the bikes. But I rely on them mostly for everything. Because they're really good at what they do, and we can give suggestions, certain things here and there, and we develop some bikes for the U.S. only, like our RRS, our dual sport. That's kind of a U.S. only bike. I think they're selling a few in Canada now, but that was designed just for the U.S. So those things there, we have to provide all the specs and everything, and they work with us on that. But for the most part, honestly, we rely on the engineers to develop the products and what have you.
That's cool.
The 200 was definitely a result of me pushing for a 200. I rode a KTM 200 in 03 and 04 and raced it. I was a dealer back then, and I love that bike. And then when we came out with the 125 platform, I'm like, hey, perfect. Let's build a 200. It's a no-brainer. So
I love that. In fact, I get people emailing me all the time now, and they're, sometimes they'll be saying, I'm thinking about a KTM 150 or the Beta 200. And now that I've had time on the Beta 200, this is an easy answer for me. And and I've been saying, get the Beta 200. The Beta 200 does everything that the KTM 125 does, except it does it just a little bit better because the motor is better. It's a more usable power. It's a more, just versatile motor, in my opinion. And so I love that. And that brings me to maybe another question. This whole rideability tagline, it's kind of cool that you mentioned that it was sort of adopted by Beta because the media and the people, critiquing these bikes and stuff, maybe the magazines, they kind of almost invented that tagline for Beta. So with it being rideability, now what does that mean to you as a company, rideability, and who is your target customer, your target demographic? Who are you making these bikes for?
Well, for the most part, our age demographic's pretty spread. We have guys that are 78, 79 years old riding our bikes, and then we have 25-year-old kids riding our bikes. But for the most part, it's more of it's the more appreciative off-road rider, the person that wants a quality product, not the overall common guy that's going to go and buy a WR250F per se, something like that. It's more of the guy that's a lot of KTM guys, no doubt, and a lot of guys coming from other brands. We get a lot of Honda guys, Yamaha guys. But overall, it's a person who enjoys riding off road. Obviously, we're an off road based company. Um, we take our off road bikes and turn them into race bikes for the hardcore guys, and then for everybody else, we build a motorcycle for them. That's kind of the thinking, and that's that rideability term. That's where it comes from, is because the bike doesn't rip your arms off, or it's not um, twitchy when you ride it. You know, the handling is very stable, but yet it still turns. So our buyer really is a guy that is generally, I'd say, our average age buyer is 45 to 48 years old. That seems to be about the average age if you pick the middle. But like I said, I get emails from guys that our cross trainer has kind of reinvented a few guys that haven't ridden for 20 years. They say, hey, I just bought a cross trainer. I love it. Thanks for building this bike. I'm 71 years old, and I'm back on a dirt bike. You know, so we get that really puts a smile on my face. I'll ask that customer to send me a picture or something on top of a mountain so we can, you know, it's really cool to see that, you know, because it's a part of the business. But overall, it's the type of customer that's looking for a little bit higher quality, a real high quality level of service after the sale. And we have a great group of dealers. You know, we're growing our dealer market as we speak, and just really trying to handpick these dealers so that they can take care of the customers, whatever they need.
You know, something you said there really got me thinking. I'm looking at your website right now, and I'm counting about 16 different models of off-road bikes. And that doesn't count the trials bikes. It's just, I think it's about 16. I was just doing some quick math on that. And I'm going, wow, for a company that, you know, is a smaller company, they have decided to make a bike for everybody. That's one of the things that you said that got me noodling on that. And that's the thing that I love about these the European companies are not afraid to put out a bike model for every person. And Beta is doing that just as well as anyone else. And the thing that blows my mind is you're not making, you know, a lot of these bikes. You're making maybe less bikes than some of these other companies out there, yet you've got this wide variety of different models. And I think that's why people like you guys, is because you make a bike for just about everyone, right?
Yeah, I mean, we have a good broad range. You know, I mean, we have standard edition RRs. We have 4 versions of a 2-stroke and 4 versions of a 4-stroke. You know, and as you see, I mean, you know, that every one has its own personality.
Yes.
That's what's really neat about the bikes. You know, I get guys email me all the time, hey, what size 4-stroke's best for me? And I say, man, I'll tell you, I ask questions like, what was your last favorite 4-stroke or your last favorite bike? You know, that's one. What's your riding ability? You know, what have you. But ultimately, and we don't really have any deadbeat sellers either. You know, that's the thing. I mean, all the bikes sell pretty well. That's what's amazing. And we have some that sell more than others. Obviously, the 300 market's big. The 500 and the 390 4-stroke market's big. And then the 200 market's growing like a weed. But ultimately, all the bikes sell really well. So it's you know, it's not easy for us. But when you have you know, our dual sports, if you take our dual sport range, the RRS, you know, it's available on a 350, 390, 430, and a 500.
Yeah.
Basically the same motorcycle as our race edition 4-strokes. So that 390 that you rode, Kyle, that 390 was basically our RRS model was real close to that bike in 19. I mean, it did have a single injector versus your race edition had a twin injector.
Mm-hmm.
And it has obviously a closed cartridge front fork versus an open cartridge. Other than that, the bike is the same. The engines come off the same assembly line. And this year for 20, the RRSs do have the dual injection. So the bike is really close to the same as a race edition. You know, we might do some tests this year with one of our racers where he takes the bike and goes on dual sport, takes the bike out and go race a hare scramble with it. Because you really can do everything with the same bike for the most part.
Yeah, you know, something that I've noticed big time with the Betas is just the lower seat height. And I can't quite put my finger on it, but a lot of times I feel like I'm riding a bike that is maybe 7/8 of the size of a lot of these others, like a Yamaha or a KTM or a Husky or something like this. What's the thought process behind that to make? Because to me, it does make the bike more rideable. I can't tell you how many emails I get from people who say, "I'm only 5'7", I'm 5'8". What do you think is the best bike for me?" And I immediately go into, I'm like, "Have you looked at Beta? Because you might be a lot more comfortable on this bike." So has that been a design? A purposeful design feature to have these bikes the seat heights be a little bit lower to the ground than some of the other bikes out there?
Yeah, overall, it's 3/4 of an inch to an inch and a quarter lower, depending on which model. Right in there when you're talking um, the bike just resting on its wheels, and it's uh, a sales feature as much as overall handling. It really attributes to how the bike handles. There's no doubt. Because we have tall guys that buy betas too.
Right.
You know, they put a tall seat foam on them, and they, ultimately. But the we give up about a half inch to 3/4 of an inch of travel and ground clearance, but that's more than made up for the handling of the bike.
Okay.
I feel.
Well,
But ultimately, they're a sub 37-inch seat height, and I ran into it at my dealership too. I mean, we had guys come in sitting on some of these other brands, and it was like, you get a 5'6" guy who's a good rider, and he climbs on a bike, and he's literally hanging off the thing.
yeah.
And I'm like, man, you're going to have a tough time. I mean, you get up in the hills and stuff, you're going to have a tough time. But ultimately, it's built into the overall design of the motorcycle and the balance and the feel, and that's basically what they're going after. Again, that feeling that you get when you ride the motorcycle.
Yeah, I'm glad that you mentioned that about the little bit less ground clearance, because there have been a couple times that I felt like I was hitting my foot pegs on things that I didn't think I was going to hit them on other bikes. But you say it's about 3/4 of an inch or something like there down there on the pegs,
Depending on model.
depending on
Yeah,
model.
depending on model. But
Yeah. So tell me about the BYOB program, because this is one thing that I think a lot of the true hardcore beta fans. And by the way, you guys are doing something right, because if I say something on my channel that is even partially critical of a beta, I get beta lovers coming at me with pitchforks. I mean, I have had, I won't say death threats, but I have had physical threats against me for if I say something that somebody might take as like, "Hey, you're saying something bad about this." So the marketing and the product you've created a tribe. And I think that is awesome. That is one of my favorite things about it is I'm like, "Oh, here comes a beta person just really ticked off at me because of something that I said." But that is special. That is really, really special. There's a lot of brand loyalty, but on the beta side of things, it seems like it's extra. There's an extra commitment in there from the beta people. And one of the things that the beta people will constantly talk to me about is the BYOB program, the Build Your Own Beta program. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because no one else does this in the industry.
Well, basically, it's simple. The thinking was back in 2007 when I first started getting things going. You go to a car dealership. That's the best way I can sum it up. Say you're going to go buy your wife a new SUV. You go to a car lot. They don't have the one model lined up 10 deep. They have generally 10 or 15 of them, and they all have different option packages. So that was really what the design started from, was where a guy can, he or she can go and order the bike the way they want it. There's some things we can't install and what have you because of EPA, but for the most part, the design was so that you can customize the bike. And it's been a great program. The guys that buy them love them. And getting back to your earlier question, talking about our customers, our demographic, that is an tribute to our customers. They are very loyal and very proud of Beta, and that goes hand in hand with all of our buyers. And ultimately, the BYOB program is just something that I put that together mainly because people want a customized bike. They want something that they want. And even if it's just handguards, a soft seat foam, and a different skid plate, it's still a BYOB. And it gets delivered to their dealer with all those goodies on it. And we put a custom little name engraved nameplate on the bike, and it's quite special, actually. I mean, it's really special. When the bikes, I'm a big motorcyclist historian buff, so I like the history of motorcycles, and it'll be cool in 30 years to see, oh wow, this was my old bike, the name tag's still on it, stuff like that.
Yeah.
So it's just a cool program. It's a smaller part of our overall business, but it's not going anywhere. It's a good part of our business, and it's special. And you know, um, I'm waiting for somebody to copy it. Somebody's going to copy it, but that's okay. It's special. On our side, it's a special little program.
Yeah, I love that. I think this is like custom ordering a bike, and it's just no one else does it. And you start clicking through some of the options that you can add on there, and the options are endless. I was surprised when I actually dug through the website and started seeing all the different things that you could customize. Between forks and skid plates and seat covers and just everything in there. And it makes me kind of I guess I kind of know why the other manufacturers don't do it, is because it's a special order program. And then you'd have this, you're trying to fill these orders, but at the same time, it gives you that customer loyalty, because people are like, this bike was built for me. It was like hand built for me. And there's some really, that's a really cool feeling. How long does it take? Like on average, if somebody does a BYOB bike rather than just going to the dealer, is this like a 6-month process? How long does it generally take?
No, it's 30 to 45 days after they do the order.
Okay.
So basically, because the bikes are built here, we get the bikes, we pull them out of the crate, we put the options on, and we put it back in the crate. But it's generally, if the bike is available, a lot of people ask, when are the 300 race editions going to be on BYOB, because we don't have them on there yet. And it's a great question, but the reason they're not on there is because we're still filling backlogged dealers' orders for stock bikes,
Okay.
and we haven't been able to have enough production. There's no extra bikes right now of that model. So in that term, that we don't even have them available yet. But if they're all available and they're on BYOB, generally it's 30 to 45 days. My brother, who's worked for me more than 20 years, he handles all of the BYOB managing the bikes, making sure the build is right and everything for the customer.
That's cool. And then one of the options is the low boy option. This was a press release that came out earlier this year. Was okay, our bikes already have a little bit lower seat height, and then you can do the low boy kit, which drops the seat height another couple of inches. So now we're talking about basically a factory, bike that maybe has a 3-inch lower seat height, which for some people is a total game changer, and they don't have to go down to their suspension shop and have that done. I love that.
Yeah, that's just a simple feature where it's a stock spring rate, where we try to build them ahead of time we have an in-house suspension department, and basically we try to build them ahead of time. So you go to your dealer and you just order the bike and tell them you want a low boy with it, and ultimately the bike will come 2 inches lower, and then we include the old parts, the stock fork spring, because it's a custom fork spring, and then the internal parts that we pull out. So these are parts we put inside the suspension, inside the shock and the forks. But they're included, so that way if the guy sells the bike or later down the road they want to bring the bike back up to stock height, they can. But just, again, another option for the customer.
Yeah. Something that I've been curious about that I've noticed in the last couple of betas that I have, and this may sound like a little thing to you, but it's just something I'm really curious on. So on all the betas that I've had, or at least the 2 that I currently have, I know this is the case, and the 390 that I just gave back. On my left hand, I have a Brembo clutch, and on my right hand, I have a Nissan brake. Why split the two? Is that a purposeful? It has to be a purposeful thing. But why not have Brembo on both or Nissan on both hands?
Well, in the beginning, back when we developed the Enduro bike, the factory chose Nissan brakes, and we use the same exact brakes to this day. They've worked so well as far as feel and reliability, everything. I mean, I can honestly tell you, we have the same part number for more than 10 years now. For 13, 14 years now, we've had the same part number for our brake components, because I think overall KTM's have Brembo, and that's their thing, and we have Nissan brakes. I mean, and Nissan obviously doesn't make a hydraulic clutch cylinder, So that's why we use, you know, the Brembo clutch cylinder. So ultimately, I think it's just the overall performance that our factory is happy with the performance of the brakes. I'm certainly happy with them. I mean, they're just right. They feel good. It's the same system that's used on many of the Japanese bikes, and it's just bulletproof basically. So that's the reason in a nutshell.
Well, that's cool. I like the fact that there is something behind that. This is something that it's tradition, it's history, it's we've been doing it forever, and it's been working forever. So if it's not broken, why fix it?
Yeah,
So
they haven't found anything better, in their eyes, So ultimately, they just stick with that.
this may be an interesting question here because you've already kind of thrown me a loop. You defined your competition as yourselves. So my question was going to be, what are the things that you think sets Beta apart from the competition in your view? So let's pretend that you do have a competitor and they're not Beta. What are the things that you just in Tim's eyes, what sets Beta apart from the competition? We've talked about a lot of things that the company does and things that they do well, but if you had to explain it in a nutshell, what sets Beta apart from the other dirt bike manufacturers?
Probably a couple things. One is our model range. We have models the others don't have, and we have a full range, as you know, including trials bikes, and that mixes with a 200 and a cross trainer, which is thrown in there. So model range and model selection, and the most important thing we've already talked about, honestly, is the ease of riding. That's plain and simple. They're easier to ride than our competition.
Very good.
That's the best thing I can sum up. And most of our bikes are sold through word of mouth. The guy shows up with a Beta. His buddy, wow, you got a Beta? Yeah, here, ride it. Because I get emails all the time. Man, I rode a Beta last week, and I have to have one. And that's a great way to sell motorcycles for sure. So ultimately, it's the ease of riding that we get guys that'll email say, "Hey, I was a C rider. I bought a Beta, and I quickly moved up to the B class. I feel so confident on the bike. It's easy to ride." And again, and that wasn't made up by me, a marketing guy. That was made up by our customers. The rideability thing, like I said earlier.
Another question. We went over this over an email thread back before we set up this podcast interview, and it has to do with kickstarts. And so I kind of understand your view on this, but I know that the listeners would like to hear this because I hear about it all the time via email and phone calls that I get. So as you know, basically the kickstarts, the backup kickstarters on pretty much all the bikes out there, and it isn't just exclusive to Beta, or being removed from everything. Now, I get it in a motocross bike because you're always by the truck. But Beta is producing a bike that is an enduro bike, that is an off-road bike, that a lot of times you could be 50 miles from nowhere. And when and if, I should say, if and when things happen, because electrical components can fail, one failed on me last week, it's nice to know that you've got a backup Kickstarter. So can you talk to our listeners about how the decisions are weighed out to remove the backup Kickstarter? Is this a weight thing? Is it a costs thing? Or just tell us how those decisions are made.
Well, it's 95% weight. Overall, when our engineers are redesigning a new package, new chassis or engine or what have you, we're constantly trying to find ways to make the package smaller and lighter, and obviously without hurting reliability or anything. So, you can shave hardware down. You can redesign a certain widget to make it a little lighter. But the Kickstarter is heavy. The components of the Kickstarter are heavy. You can instantly shave almost two pounds off the motor right away. And we talked about this, but it's an old, the old saying in the dirt bike industry is brochure weight. What's the weight? It drives so many sales of weight. Even in the off-road business, it does. Which, in reality, the four-strokes, like our Hare and Hound race bikes, they weigh about 6 pounds more than a KTM. That's an advantage to us. We got Joe Watson out there and Chance Fullerton and Zane Roberts out there and Morgan Tankey racing the Hare and Hound. And on the big four-strokes, though, it's an advantage because they just But at the end of the day, the Kickstarter thing is weight. I'll tell you, I mean, the new engine on our four strokes just came out this year in 2020 because it's an all new engine. We moved the clutch up and we moved the crankshaft back to get the mass more towards the center of the bike. And my boss called me and said, "Do we really need a Kickstarter on there?" And I was like, "Yes, please put the ability to put a Kickstarter on there." But then they did, thank goodness. But I mean, a lot of manufacturers are shaving it off where you don't even have that option. Now that scares me.
Right.
And when we did this, we looked at Kickstart sales because obviously the only place you can buy a Kickstarter is through Beta for the bike, a Kickstart kit. And we looked at this, and we sell, like I told you, we sell about 20% of the buyers buy a Kickstart kit. So that kind of tells us that, it's that there's 80% out there that didn't buy a Kickstart kit, and ultimately the majority, it's not too big of a concern for them. For me, like I told you, I think I said in the email, our grandparents were probably all mad when they took the crank off, or our great grandparents when they took the crank off of a car, But I think at the end of the day, I mean, if I had like on my four strokes, I've never run a Kickstarter. I've never even needed to pull the Kickstarter out, on my e-start bikes. I know that it does happen, but ultimately, I think if you ask most of the guys that have, when we had Kickstart bikes with electric start, it was very rare the guy ever used the Kickstart. So I think to answer your question, Kyle, it's weight. It's being able to shave 2.5 pounds off the brochure weight right away. Production costs, yes and no. I mean, these bikes. I mean, I think the bikes are. Some guys say bikes are getting real expensive, but in my mind, it's like, man, price mountain bikes lately. I mean, I mean, really, if you really want to ask me who our competition is, it's the side by side business and the e-bike sales. Those are the two that are taking dirt bike riders away. I feel, because the side by side business, they have cup holders. They're easy to operate. They're bring the whole family along. But for the motorcycles and the overall usability of the bike, I think we've just found that it's not as big a concern as we would think, and that's why we offer it as an option. So the guy that absolutely has to have a Kickstarter will even do it on BYOB. And a lot of our BYOB guys, we actually do put a Kickstarter kit on. Yeah. If I had to guess, it's probably 6 out of 10 of them, because they're your more hardcore enthusiasts,
Yeah, and I will admit that it is a smaller portion of the industry that is riding these bikes in the extreme locations that maybe where that does come into play. And I'll concede that point, but those are people that are emailing me, and we've been saved by Kickstarts in the past. We've been in places where the bikes wouldn't start at the beginning of the day because it was too cold, and the electric start would not turn the bike over that much, and then we've had to drag them behind trucks to get them to start. But we won't belabor that point. I thank you so much for the honesty and just going over that, because it is something I just wanted to clear the air with people. And I thank you greatly that you have continued to say, well, let's leave the option to the customer, because that way the customer can put it on. It's an it's not an aftermarket thing because it's an OEM part, but they can get that part and they can put that on for those people. And I think that if you continue to do that, you will continue to have those loyal customers that go, look, I'm riding Beta because I get options. I'm in control of what I have and the product that I'm riding. And I think that's a fantastic thing. So
yeah, and to back up on that, Kyle, too, when we took it off the bikes a couple of years ago, when we took it off, if we would have sold 80% or 65% Kickstarters, we would have put it back on there. I mean, it sends a clear message that our customers want a Kickstarter. So that's the reason is we just really didn't sell that many overall, which is we sell several hundred. Don't get me wrong, but out of several thousand motorcycles, I mean, that it just told us that okay, it's a 18 to 21% ratio there.
Well, I get that, and I thank you for being so transparent on that. That's fantastic. So tell me this one. What is your and this may be hard for you to narrow it down, but what is your favorite bike? What's Tim's favorite bike in the Beta lineup and why?
That's an easy question for me because even when I rode KTM's, it was always the big four strokes. Um, I rode the 640 LC4 back in the late 90s, mid 90s, and then I rode the 520 EXC when it came out in 2000, and rode and raced them. And then when I got involved with Beta, I rode the bigger motors, which was the 525, the RFS engine. Because our first 2 years we had KTM engines in our bikes, and then we built our own bikes. We had the 498 is what we called it, and I rode that. And today I ride a 480 race. I mean, to me, it's just I like the easeability, the usability of the motor. It's very easy to ride. It's not explosive, and it's kind of the gentleman's dirt bike is what I call it. You know, if you get a little lazy and you come out of a corner and there's a big hill climb and you don't downshift, you're going to be all right. You just turn the throttle and it just drags you up the hill. So for me, it's definitely the 480 race edition or the 500 RRS. Anything with that 500 motor in it is my favorite.
Love it. So is the motor the 480? Is that an actual different motor than the 500, or do they use mostly the same components?
It's the same motor.
Same
We
motor.
call it a five. It's the same exact engine. We call it a 500 in the dual sport just so it has its own little definition, its own little, in the dual sport world, it's a 500 RRS.
What is the actual
But it's
displacement of that motor then?
478, 478.
So let me get this straight. It's a 478 cc motor, but it's marketed as a 480 and a 500, just depending on which frame you put it in.
Correct. Correct. That's
Oh,
been going on for years, no matter what brand. I mean, the just depends on the company.
yeah, that is awesome. And then obviously with different heads and maybe different pistons and things like that, you can totally change the characteristics of that motor. I assume that the 480 has a little different feel to it than the 500, right? As far as how the power
No,
characteristic.
no, it's the same injection system for 2020. Like I was saying, it's the same injection system, the same motor. They come off the same assembly line. There
Wow.
really is the frame is the same. Everything's the same. Um, it's just our dual sports are, and I tell my dealers this. I tell customers that ask us, our dual sports are what dirt bike guys asked for many years ago. They are a full blown dirt bike, dirt/race bike with a plate.
I was just going to say they've
They're,
got different forks though. They've got different suspension components, but the other things they all are the same. Is that what you're saying?
the forks are the only difference as far as suspension. The swing arm, rear shock, everything's the same on the RRS. There's everything's identical. The race edition has wider foot pegs. It has the aluminum billet foot pegs on it. It's got different graphics and seat. It has the closed cartridge fork. It comes and it has a few bling items on it and a dual material rear sprocket. Other than that, it's the same motorcycle.
Um,
And
uh,
ultimately, but they're horrible on the street. What I was saying, I mean, I get a guy, I'll get people that email me, hey, I really want to have a Beta. They're a cool bike. I rode motocross 15 years ago, and I want a bike to ride back and forth to work on 40 miles each way. I say, don't buy an RRS. I mean, just don't. It'll be miserable.
yeah.
It's a dirt bike. It's a dirt bike with a plate to connect trails, and you don't get harassed. And we pay the big homologation fees every year to make sure we pass all the homologation, and so but the difference between the 480, the engines are exactly the same.
That is so cool, and I love that transparency there. That's when you say this bike doesn't go great on the street because it's a dirt bike. It happens to be a dirt bike with a plate. It's street legal so that you can connect these trails, but don't expect this to be a commuter. I tell that to people all the time. I'm like, look, if you have a tire that is approved, like a DOT tire that's approved to go on the street, it's a nightmare on the dirt, and you're
Right.
you're unsafe. So there's only so many compromises you can make, and I love the fact that you just admit that. Like, look, this is a dirt bike, a racing dirt bike that has mirrors and has signal lights, but let's not confuse this with a commuter bike, a street bike.
Right. And in this industry, Kyle, you can't have it all. I mean, you take the new Honda, the 450L that came out, and it's more streetable. I mean, it is. It's got a push drive rear hub, I believe. It has features on it that make it a little bit easier when you hit the pavement. I mean, we've all been there. You pop off the trail on your dirt bike and you got to go down the road for 6 miles. It's miserable.
Yeah.
It's like it rattles your teeth out because the tires aren't balanced, and you know. But it's no, they were designed as basically trail connector dirt bikes. That's what they are.
Yeah. So shifting gears here a little bit, why make the decision for oil injection on some of the two strokes, specifically the RRs, but keep the oil injection off of the race bikes? I guess I kind of understand why you keep it off the race bikes, but why kind of split it down the middle where you have a carburetor on all the two strokes, but some of them have oil injection? What's the thought process there?
Well, to differentiate the models, to create a separation, so you have a couple different buyers. Um, the oil injection is designed to be user friendly, ease of use. A guy that's trail riding doesn't want to deal with mixing his or her gas. The race editions, again, weight. It shaves weight off the bike. Racers don't care about mixing their gas. They don't mind it. They've been doing it for years. They generally do they've done it for so many years on their other bikes. It's not anything, but mostly weight. We did add all the components in the race edition. Now we have all the components in there, so you can add the oil injection. But we get very few people that add oil injection to their race bike, to their race edition bike. A few BYOB guys every now and then, and some guys go through their dealer and order the kit, because we make a kit if you want to add it to a race edition. But all in all, it's to differentiate the two different models. They're two different models. One wants to go a little bit faster all the time, which is the race edition with a closed cartridge fork, and the other one is a casual trail riding bike for that person that likes to plunk along and or rip along a single track and doesn't want to deal with mixing their oil and gas. Some of these guys are really enjoying it because they can go on long rides and pull up to the gas station and fill their tanks up. So that's really a benefit there.
That is certainly a benefit, to be able to just use pump gas. Another two-stroke question. What is Beta's stance on the movement to fuel injection? I know that KTM is doing this for emission standards in Europe. Is Beta working on its own version, or are you sticking with the carburetors? Do these same Euro 4 and Euro 5 standards, emission standards, are they applicable to Beta, or how does this shake out?
Well, that's a good question. I think, first of all, I don't know the answer as far as when we are coming out with injection, because by purpose, I tell my boss, don't give me too much information. That way, if it leaks out, it wasn't from me. So, I do pre-order our bikes early for the next model year. So basically, we have to order bikes, in October, November to get them for the following year that soon, because it takes that long to get components. But I don't know. I'm sure we're working on some fuel injected two strokes. I don't know when it's coming. Kind of a surprise to me. Again, this industry always throws you for a loop. But apparently, having a counterbalancer and a carburetor is really a cool thing nowadays. Because, when we released our bikes, we were overwhelmed with people sending us emails thanking us for having a carburetor counterbalance two-stroke. I was like, right on. That's great. I did not know that that's what a lot of people wanted. Is it coming? For sure it is. It's coming. Beta tends to be a little bit more conservative. They'll sit back, again, getting back to that family-owned company where we don't have to rush products. They might wait till the system's out there, or whoever's working on fuel injection, where the companies get a little better at it, and then they'll jump in and decide what, when, and where. But it could be next year, it could be 3 years from now. I honestly don't know, Kyle. I kind of focus on what we've got now, and I think it's definitely coming. I'm an old school guy. I love carburetors, but I do have to admit, when you ride a carbureted four-stroke next to it back-to-back with a fuel injected, and I'm sure you see this. It's a night and day difference on the performance overall. That the EFI just performs better everywhere.
Yeah.
On the two-stroke, it's a little different because of the two-stroke um, isn't as lazy of an engine as a four-stroke, so to speak. So the two-stroke, I don't know if we have the best carburetor in the business on our bikes, Keans, and we ultimately take pride in our jetting because our engineers work very hard at that. So ultimately, I don't know. I don't know the answer because I'm not 100% sure what I would bet money that the owner of Beta doesn't know when we're going to release it yet. Waiting to make sure that it's right.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, and I think I think right now, if you can hold off of EFI, I think that's a selling feature. So this industry is kind of a niche, and then it's in a niche within a niche. I have people that are telling me they are purposely now finally buying a two-stroke bike because it's fuel injected. And then I have this other crowd of people that are telling me they're never going to buy a fuel injected two-stroke, And I take that with a grain of salt because my reply to them, at least internally inside my mind, is I go, be careful saying that, because I think if you stay in this industry very long, you will be forced to buy a fuel injected two-stroke because there won't be another option. But in this little gray area here this time, I think Beta is probably smart to just sit here and let some of these other developers, some of these other manufacturers go through those growing pains and stay with what is tried and true. The only problem with the carburetors that I see on a two-stroke is most of the riders out there buy the bikes and they're not even checking tire pressure. And so if they happen to live in an area or at an elevation or a density altitude, I should say, where that carburetor is tuned, then it works fine. Problem is they might live at 5,000 feet or 6,000 feet. And now that bike they're never going to unlock the true potential of that bike because they're not even checking tire pressure. So they're not pulling jets out. They're not dropping the needle clip position or trying a different needle. And that's where the beauty of EFI comes in is, yeah, it adds some complexity and some weight, but it's just like the four strokes. It's now going to run near perfect all the time. But Beta's in a unique position here where, you can stay with the carburetor. And I think if I was Beta, I'd probably stick with the carburetor as long as I could.
Well, and like I said, that's probably the case with us. I think a lot of our shops in higher elevation, Colorado and Wyoming, and a lot of the in Idaho, a lot of the shops will, when they set the bike up for the customer, if he or she's a local rider, they'll set it up with the right jetting. Oh, the owner's manuals come with a jetting chart in them, and it's very detailed. If you're this temperature range and this altitude range, put these jets in the bike.
Yeah.
And ultimately, I think a lot of our dealers are setting the bikes up that way for the customers because, occasionally you get the guy, well, I want EFI because I go from sea level to 10,000 feet. Okay, that's 0.01% of the guys out there.
Right.
That's the hardcore guys. The average rider doesn't do that. He or she buys the bike and rides in their riding area within their area. That's what they do. And we get a lot of guys, hey, I live in Colorado, I'm going to Baja. Oh, here's the jetting you want to run type of thing. But I think overall, for us, two strokes, as you know, a lot of guys ride two strokes, one, because of their lightweight, but two, because of their simplicity.
Yes.
And they can work on themselves. And I think the guys that are yelling at you about never buying a fuel-injected two-stroke, those are the guys, I think, that they want the simplicity of a carburetor, And I get it. I mean, as an old mechanic, I rode my 2015 for 2 years because I didn't want to jump into an EFI four-stroke. But then once I did, I rode them, like I said, back to back at great length. I was like, oh my gosh, man, I've been missing out. Four-stroke carbureted bikes they're lazy. They're so much lazy.
Yeah, this is maybe my favorite question, the one that I'm interested in the very most to hear your perspective on, and of course you may have to answer this in a political way with your position, but I still want to hear what your reasoning is. So here's the question: is the arrow pointing up or down for the dirt bike industry as a whole? And tell us why you think it is.
for beta or just the industry as a whole?
Yeah, the industry. So this isn't a beta specific question. This is a dirt bike industry as far as moto and off road and all of these things. So is the dirt bike industry as a global, thing? Is the arrow pointing up or down on that?
It's in the middle. It's flat. So it's not dive bombing like some of the other markets, and it's not skyrocketing like say the adventure market's taken off, and the sport bike market's kind of slowing up. It's a pretty flat, solid market. I think, like I said earlier, our biggest competitors that would affect our industry, the industry that we love, is the side by sides, first and foremost. Because hey, when I had my motorcycle shop, I was a Yamaha dealer. You get families coming in, and they have 2 kids, the wife, the husband, and they're buying 4 bikes, and then all the riding gear, and then they gotta buy a trailer because their pickup truck can't hold 4 motorcycles, and that can be tough. So now many of them are going down and buying a 4-seater side by side and 4 helmets and calling it good. The sad part, the tragedy of that is, besides taking the sales away from the motorcycle business, it doesn't take it from the motorcycle dealers per se. But in my mind, the tragedy is they will never experience the feeling of a motorcycle ride. And that, as you know, and all of your listeners know, it's very special and very unique. And I think to myself, man, you're never going to experience that because a side-by-side does not give you that thrill. And so I encourage so many young kids to ride dirt bikes. When they come out to my ranch, my daughters, I have a wife and 4 kids, and my 2 youngest daughters are 15 and 16. Their friends come out. Have you ever ridden a dirt bike? No. Get your parents on the phone. I want to see if they can. Oh yeah, they can ride. Okay, go out there and they'll ride all day long, because it's just as you know, growing up, it's just something that you never experience. So the side-by-side business is kind of taking that away. It's not necessarily a negative comment towards side-by-sides. I mean, I get it. They're making some pretty aggressive side-by-sides out there. I used to sell them as a Polaris dealer when the Razor came out. But all in all, the motorcycle off-road, that buyer, he's still there. They're still out there buying bikes because the race entries are still healthy. You go to the races these days, the entries are pretty solid still. They're not desolate. And our, overall, if you take all the off-road sales across the board in the U.S., they're pretty stable. They're not, like I said, they're not dive bombing. And I think, all in all, and then you have those guys when the industry boomed back in the late '90s, all the way through 2005 and 6. There was a lot of young kids racing motocross back then, Kyle, and now those guys have children, and they're taking them out and taking them riding. So we have those folks are coming up behind us as well. But honestly, the dirt bike industry as a whole, I don't think it's pointing up or down. I think it's stable right now.
That's good, and I'm actually really glad to hear you say that, because I hear so many other people talking about how the sky is falling, but I haven't bought into that. I don't have industry reports, but my gut feeling says, I'm just looking at the emails coming into me, and I get these emails from guys who are telling me, okay, I'm 30, 40, 50, and sometimes even 60, and they're saying, I'm now just finally getting into dirt bikes, and thank you for helping me, and tell me some of these other things that I should do. And I'm going, okay, a lot of guys are worried that the younger kids are not getting into dirt bikes, and that may be true in some cases because they're stuck playing video games. But then there's this other demographic of these people who now have a little bit of disposable income and now are getting into it. And that was me. I didn't own a dirt bike until I was just about 30. And I came into this sport, and it has literally taken over my life. The reason we're having this conversation is because dirt bikes got into my blood and I couldn't get it out, and now this is what I'm doing full time. And there's a lot of guys like me out there. And so to hear your take on that, I love to hear that. Obviously we want it to grow, but I'll take it being flat rather than what some of these other people think, which is that the arrow is pointed down. And I think you've got a decent insight on that. I hadn't even thought about the side by sides, but that makes a lot of sense. I think side by sides are, well, I won't tell you what I think. Email me, email me, and I'll
Yeah,
tell you.
right. I know. I know.
Because
I know. I'm there with you.
I have some really strong feelings about that, but I don't want to alienate or put anyone in shame or anything. So that's really cool. A side note, just kind of in closing, because and I really appreciate your time. I've probably taken too much of it, but as we kind of wrap up here, electric bikes. So you mentioned that e-bikes are a competitor along with the side by sides, but electric dirt bikes. I'm talking about like an electric dirt bike. We've seen a couple of them, like the Alta, and maybe it was Redshift or whatever in the motocross thing. Are electric bikes a real thing? Do you think that this is going to take off? Is it viable?
Well, that's going to be up to the consumer. I mean, ultimately, the Alta deal. We were actually one of the companies that looked at purchasing Alta when they went. They shut their doors down, and they're just up the road from us a couple 3 hours. And we took a hard look at it. I mean, we looked at everything. We came back with the assumption that good bike, but you got to sell it for $16,000 to make a living, and ultimately put you out of the market. I think right now for kids bikes, like we have a couple small trials bikes, and Offset has some little kids electric bikes, and we like I say we have two models of electric trials bikes, and we have a little beginner mini cross. Um, it's basically just a play bike that's electric. So they're great for that because kids can ride in the backyard. They can tool around on them. They can ride in a very small area and not offend anybody. But I don't know. Have you ridden an electric? Have you ridden an Alta or any of the other?
No, I haven't. I haven't had the opportunity. I have two concerns with them. First is just the battery life. I need the battery to be able to work solidly for somewhere between 4 to 6 hours, and I think most of them are 1 to 2, and so it would really limit the riding we do. And then the other major concern that I have is the clutch. Now they will say, well, we don't need a clutch because our bike makes full torque at 1 RPM, and I say, well, the clutch isn't all about just it's about modulating the power to the ground. And so even if Beta made an electric bike for me tomorrow, I would want it to have a clutch so that I can still do a double blip or something, these types of maneuvers where I want to control the power in two different ways, by modulating the power with my clutch and blipping over a rock or a log. So those two things, if I could get a battery that would last for 6 hours, that was hot swappable when I got back to the truck, and I could swap it in maybe less than a minute or two, and then having a clutch. And if those two things were worked out, I think it might be fine.
Well, my take on them is, again, getting back, I'm a motorhead. I'm a gearhead. I love wrenching just as much as I do riding, believe it or not. My experience with riding the bike is motorcycling gives you, let's just say, it stimulates like 6 different senses, from the vibration, the sound, when you twist the throttle, all these things. When you ride an electric bike, it kills about 3 or 4 of those senses.
Yeah.
It takes them away, and it's not the same. I don't care who you talk to; it is not the same. When you rev an engine up to get up a hill, or when the electric world is different. Is there a place for them? You bet there is. As far as performance-based motorcycles, I don't think that's their place. I think their place is little commuters around town. Obviously, some of the Japanese are dabbling with super. Kawasaki just announced they're dabbling with a sport bike with electric motor. Harley's got their live wire. That's a different market. As far as performance-based off-road motorcycles, you lose some of the senses of true off-road motorcycling. So in my eyes, it's viable. It's coming. There's going to be one of the hardcore manufacturers is really going to make a big push. KTM's done a little bit, but not much. But it's not going to be to the guys that are buying our bikes or buying. I don't think overall maybe a very small percentage of those guys. I tell everybody there's many of these guys that want an electric bike and they've never ridden one, like an Alta, because that was the Alta Redshift was the most competitive, viable bike that they tried really hard. I give that to them. They tried really hard, but again, the bike had to be 17,000 or maybe even a little more to be profitable. And I tell those guys that want an electric bike, you need to go ride one of those things because it's just not the same. If you're a hardcore off-road rider, like the people in our industry are, the bike doesn't. When you get off of it, it doesn't give you that feeling. Like that feeling you got riding our 390, you would never have that with an electric bike. And that's the only bummer side of the e-business. But I think all in all, it's coming. But at what? I mean, obviously, if it was super viable right now, everybody would be doing it.
Yeah.
Because it's certainly 80% of our development is in the engine on our bikes. 80% of the cost is in the engine. 70 to 80%. So an electric engine to put a bike there, I'm not saying it's easier, but it's definitely not like designing a special engine. So it just depends on I think the product, the use of that model is going to be the big thing. I think for certain uses, it's going to be great. If you want something to run around town and do, it's going to be fantastic. It'll get more people on dirt bikes. I mean, like Yamaha has their little PW50. If they put an electric motor in that little bike, they would continue to sell that bike even more so because it'd be so user friendly.
Yeah.
The parent could literally lean the thing over in the back of their car, and they don't have to bring a gas can.
Yeah.
And it could maybe have a battery pack that's changed out, like you said, a minute or two. But right now in the off road, the bikes we're talking about, you and I right here, I don't see it. Definitely not for $10,000.
Yeah.
The technology's not there.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Tim, this has been, I've thoroughly enjoyed this. I took a bunch of notes as you were talking. I tried not to type too loud so it picked up on my microphone, but it was an absolute pleasure. I learned a ton of things, and I know that the listeners out there are going to just really love the peek behind the curtain. It's not every day that we get to talk to, the president of any of these, companies, the president of Beta USA here on the podcast. It's been an absolute pleasure. And I just wanted to thank you guys for doing what you're doing and sticking to your roots and figuring, being true to who you are. You've been fantastic to work with. There's only been one other company that ever let me borrow a bike, and that was Husky. The other brands haven't felt like that was needed. And the other thing that I liked about it was the fact that you weren't controlling what I was saying about the bikes. I had a guy yesterday say, "Oh, well, now we finally get a real review of a Beta because now you finally bought one." And I said, "No. That's not how that's not how this worked." I told Tim that I was going to say what I was going to say about the bike. And if he didn't like about it, we could have a conversation about it, but I wasn't going to go redo the video. And if I did redo any video, I would tell the listener, this is what Beta wants me to say. And you told me something that has stuck with me. You said, "I'm not here to influence what you say. I just wanted to educate you on my perspective, but I'm not here to, object or change your review." And that has stuck with me for 3 years. And it has given me confidence in what you guys are doing. You're confident that the bike is good enough. And I think that the best thing about it is it gives you that goodwill, because I've been able to say to people, "Hey, look, Beta is a great company, and they stepped up to the plate. They basically lent me this bike for 2 or 3 months or whatever. And then we turn around, we sell that. I mean, I give it back to the dealer sells it as a used model. No one loses in that scenario. You get a little bit of exposure from my channel. I get to use the bike without having to take a loss on it. The dealer turns around and sells it as a used bike to the customer, and it ends up being a win-win for everyone. And that's because you've had the great business sense and just the nice guy attitude to let me do that. And so I wanted to thank you for that.
Well, and likewise, Kyle, I think what you're doing is fantastic. I mean, I've seen your dirt bike channel grow, and overall, I have to compliment you. Especially, I just hear you just told me you started riding when you're 30, which is awesome. I mean, you're going to be riding until you're 90. Geez, but ultimately, I really want to thank you for giving us giving me some airtime. I know you have a lot of good listeners, and especially your raw press is what I call what you are doing. It's raw and it's real. And even with the magazines, I mean, I have relationships with all those guys. I've known them for years. A lot of the guys out there will say that things like, "Oh, well, you advertise in the magazine, they're going to say good things about your bike." That is not true. I mean, I can tell you first and foremost, those are two different things that are kept separate, and they'll say things about your bike, and the only time I get my feathers ruffled is if somebody says something on a bike that I've never heard of. I had one editor tell me, like, when we came out with a cross trainer, you could never race this motorcycle about a cross. And boy, I just flew off the handle. I'm like, I wanted to go race the King of Motos on one just to prove. I mean, I couldn't believe somebody would say that, right? Of course, you can race a cross trainer. I mean, you may not be able to race it at a pro level, but a C rider would go out and have a wonderful time racing.
Absolutely.
But I really appreciate your time. What you're doing is great, and just keep doing what you're doing.
Yeah. Well, I'll keep doing what I'm doing. You keep doing what you're doing, and that is going to be a good combination. I can't wait to start riding. And when the new year hits, I'm going to start breaking out the 300 RR and just trying that one. And in the meantime, I'm loving this 200, and I hope you sell a boatload of those things because it's a great bike. So thanks so much for the thanks so much for the time, and we'll keep in touch over email.
Okay, have a good evening, right. Kyle. Thank you.
You too. Bye. So that was Tim Pilg, president of Beta USA. I just hung up the phone with him. That was freaking awesome. I loved that interview. It's just so cool to hear the things kind of behind the scenes with those guys. Who else is going to make themselves available for this fledgling podcast here? So Beta is a cool company, and I think we've kind of gone over that. If you like these podcasts, please leave me a review on iTunes, Stitcher, or Google Play, or Spotify, wherever you are. Give me a rating, give me a review, tell your friends about it, and I'm gonna let you guys go with that. Remember that wherever you go, make sure to leave a single track. Thanks, guys.